Book 4. The Closed Door. 8. Eustacia hears of good fortune, and beholds evil. In the meantime, Eustacia, left alone in her cottage at Alderworth, had become considerably depressed by the posture of affairs. The consequences which might result from Clim's discovery that his mother had been turned from his door that day were likely to be disagreeable, and this was a quality in events which she hated as much as the dreadful. To be left to pass the evening by herself was irksome to her at any time, and this evening it was more irksome than usual by reason of the excitements of the past hours. The 2 visits had stirred her into restlessness. She was not wrought to any great pitch of uneasiness by the probability of appearing in an ill light in the discussion between Clim and his mother, but she was wrought to vexation, and her slumbering activities were quickened to the extent of wishing that she had opened the door. She had certainly believed that Clim was awake, and the excuse would be an honest one as far as it went, but nothing could save her from censure in refusing to answer at the first knock. Yet, instead of blaming herself for the issue, she laid the fault upon the shoulders of some indistinct, colossal prince of the world, who had framed her situation and ruled her lot. At this time of the year it was pleasanter to walk by night than by day, and when Clim had been absent about an hour, she suddenly resolved to go out in the direction of Bloom's End, on the chance of meeting him on his return. When she reached the garden gate, she heard wheels approaching, and looking round, beheld her grandfather coming up in his cart. "I can't stay a minute, thank you," he answered to her greeting. "I'm driving to East Egdon. But I came round here just to tell you the news. Perhaps you've heard about Mr. Wild Eve's fortune?" "No," said Eustacia blankly. "Well, he has come into a fortune of £11,000. Uncle died in Canada, just after hearing that all his family, whom he was sending home, had gone to the bottom in the Cassiopeia. So Wild Eve has come into everything without in the least expecting it." Eustacia stood motionless a while. "How long has he known of this?" she asked. "Well, 'twas known to him this morning early, for I knew it at 10 o'clock when Charlie came back. Now, he is what I call a lucky man. What a fool you were, Eustacia." "In what way?" she said, lifting her eyes in apparent calmness. "Why, in not sticking to him when you had him." "Had him, indeed?" "I did not know there had ever been anything between you till lately, and faith, I should have been hot and strong against it if I had known. But since it seems that there was some sniffing between you, why the deuce didn't you stick to him?" Eustacia made no reply, but she looked as if she could say as much upon that subject as he, if she chose. "And how's your poor purblind husband?" continued the old man. "Not a bad feller either, as far as he goes?" "He is quite well." "It's a good thing for his cousin, what you call her. By George, you ought to have been in that galley, my girl. Now I must drive on. Do you want any assistance? What's mine is yours, you know." "Thank you, grandfather, we are not in want at present," she said coldly. "Clim cuts furs, but he does it mostly as a useful pastime, because he can do nothing else." "He is paid for his pastime, isn't he? 3 shillings a hundred, I heard." "Clim has money," she said, colouring, "but he likes to earn a little." "Very well, good night." And the captain drove on. When her grandfather was gone, Eustacia went on her way mechanically, but her thoughts were no longer concerning her mother-in-law and Clim. Wild Eve, notwithstanding his complaints against his fate, had been seized upon by destiny and placed in the sunshine once more. £11,000! From every Egdon point of view he was a rich man. In Eustatia's eyes, too, it was an ample sum, one sufficient to supply those wants of hers which had been stigmatized by Clym in his more austere moods as vain and luxurious. Though she was no lover of money, she loved what money could bring, and the new accessories she imagined around him clothed Wild Eve with a great deal of interest. She recollected now how quietly well-dressed he had been that morning. He had probably put on his newest suit, regardless of damage by briars and thorns. And then she thought of his manner towards herself. "Oh, I see it," she said. "How much he wishes he had me now, that he might give me all I desire." In recalling the details of his glances and words, at the time scarcely regarded, it became plain to her how greatly they had been dictated by his knowledge of this new event. Had he been a man to bear a jilt ill will, he would have told me of his good fortune in crowing tones. Instead of doing that, he mentioned not a word, in deference to my misfortunes, and merely implied that he loved me still, as one superior to him. Wild Eve's silence that day on what had happened to him was just the kind of behaviour calculated to make an impression on such a woman. Those delicate touches of good taste were, in fact, one of the strong points in his demeanour towards the other sex. The peculiarity of Wild Eve was that while at one time passionate, upbraiding, and resentful towards a woman, at another he would treat her with such unparalleled grace as to make previous neglect appear as no discourtesy, injury as no insult, interference as a delicate attention, and the ruin of her honour as excessive chivalry. This man, whose admiration today Eustacia had disregarded, whose good wishes she had scarcely taken the trouble to accept, whom she had shown out of the house by the back door, was the possessor of £11,000, a man of fair professional education, and one who had served his articles with a civil engineer. So intent was Eustacia upon Wild Eve's fortunes that she forgot how much closer to her own course were those of Clym, and instead of walking on to meet him at once, she sat down upon a stone. She was disturbed in her reverie by a voice behind, and turning her head, beheld the old lover and fortunate inheritor of wealth immediately beside her. She remained sitting, though the fluctuation in her look might have told any man who knew her so well as Wild Eve that she was thinking of him. "How did you come here?" she said in her clear, low tone. "I thought you were at home." "I went on to the village after leaving your garden, and now I've come back again. That's all. Which way are you walking, may I ask?" She waved her hand in the direction of Bloom's End. "I am going to meet my husband. I think I may possibly have got into trouble while you were with me today." "How could that be?" "By not letting in Mrs. Yeobright." "I hope that visit of mine did you no harm." "None. It was not your fault," she said quietly. By this time she had risen, and they involuntarily sauntered on together without speaking for 2 or 3 minutes, when Eustacia broke silence by saying, "I assume I must congratulate you." "On what?" "Oh, yes, on my £11,000, you mean. Well, since I didn't get something else, I must be content with getting that." "You seem very indifferent about it. Why didn't you tell me today when you came?" she said, in the tone of a neglected person. "I heard of it quite by accident." "I did mean to tell you," said Wildeve, "but I will speak frankly. I did not like to mention it when I saw, Eustacia, that your star was not high. The sight of a man lying wearied out with hard work as your husband lay made me feel that to brag of my own fortune to you would be greatly out of place. Yet as you stood there beside him, I could not help feeling too that in many respects he was a richer man than I." At this, Eustacia said with slumbering mischievousness, "What? Would you exchange with him your fortune for me?" "I certainly would," said Wildeve. "As we are imagining what is impossible and absurd, suppose we change the subject." "Very well, and I will tell you of my plans for the future, if you care to hear them. I shall permanently invest £9,000, keep 1,000 as ready money, and with the remaining 1,000 travel for a year or so." "Travel? What a bright idea! Where will you go to?" "From here to Paris, where I shall pass the winter and spring. Then I shall go to Italy, Greece, Egypt, and Palestine before the hot weather comes on. In the summer I shall go to America, and then by a plan not yet settled I shall go to Australia and round to India. By that time I shall have begun to have had enough of it. Then I shall probably come back to Paris again, and there I shall stay as long as I can afford to." "Back to Paris again," she murmured in a voice that was nearly a sigh. She had never once told Wildeve of the Parisian desires which Klim's description had sown in her. Yet here was he, involuntarily in a position to gratify them. "You think a good deal of Paris?" she added. "Yes, in my opinion it is the central beauty spot of the world." "And in mine. And Thomasin will go with you?" "Yes, if she cares to. She may prefer to stay at home." "So you will be going about, and I shall be staying here." "I suppose you will. But we know whose fault that is." "I am not blaming you," she said quickly. "Oh, I thought you were." "If ever you should be inclined to blame me, think of a certain evening by Rainbarrow, when you promised to meet me and did not. You sent me a letter, and my heart ached to read that, as I hope yours never will. That was one point of divergence. I then did something in haste. But she is a good woman, and I will say no more." "I know that the blame was on my side that time," said Eustacia, "but it had not always been so. However, it is my misfortune to be too sudden in feeling. Oh, Damon, don't reproach me any more. I can't bear that." They went on silently for a distance of 2 or 3 miles, when Eustacia said suddenly, "Haven't you come out of your way, Mr. Wildeve?" "My way is anywhere tonight. I will go with you as far as the hill on which we can see Bloom's End, as it is getting late for you to be alone." "Don't trouble. I am not obliged to be out at all. I think I would rather you did not accompany me, father. This sort of thing would have an odd look if known." "Very well, I will leave you." He took her hand unexpectedly and kissed it, for the first time since her marriage. "What light is that on the hill?" he added, as it were to hide the caress. She looked and saw a flickering firelight proceeding from the open side of a hovel a little way before them. The hovel, which she had hitherto always found empty, seemed to be inhabited now. "Since you have come so far," said Eustacia, "will you see me safely past that hut I thought I should have met Clem somewhere about here, but as he doesn't appear, I will hasten on and get to Bloom's End before he leaves." They advanced to the turf shed, and when they got near it, the firelight and the lantern inside showed distinctly enough the form of a woman reclining on a bed of fern, a group of heath men and women standing around her. Eustacia did not recognize Mrs. Yeobright in the reclining figure, nor Clem as one of the standers-by till she came close. Then she quickly pressed her hand upon Wild Eve's arm, and signified to him to come back from the open side of the shed into the shadow. "It is my husband and his mother," she whispered in an agitated voice. "What can it mean? Will you step forward and tell me?" Wild Eve left her side and went to the back wall of the hut. Presently Eustacia perceived that he was beckoning to her, and she advanced and joined him. "It's a serious case," said Wild Eve. From their position they could hear what was proceeding inside. "I cannot think where she could have been going," said Clem to someone. "She had evidently walked a long way, but even when she was able to speak just now, she would not tell me where. What do you really think of her?" "There is a great deal to fear," was gravely answered, in a voice which Eustacia recognized as that of the only surgeon in the district. "She has suffered somewhat from the bite of the adder, but it is exhaustion which has overpowered her. My impression is that her walk must have been exceptionally long." "I used to tell her not to overwalk herself this weather," said Clem with distress. "Do you think we did well in using the adder's fat?" "Well, it is a very ancient remedy, the old remedy of the viper-catchers, I believe," replied the doctor. "It is mentioned as an infallible ointment by Hoffman, Mead, and I think the Abbé Fontana. Undoubtedly it was as good a thing as you could do, though I question if some other oils would not have been equally efficacious." "Come here," was then rapidly said in anxious female tones, and Clem and the doctor could be heard rushing forward from the back part of the shed to where Mrs. Yeobright lay. "Oh, what is it?" whispered Eustacia. "'Twas Thomasin who spoke," said Wild Eve. "Then they've fetched her. I wonder if I had better go in, yet it might do harm." For a long time there was utter silence among the group within, and it was broken at last by Clem saying, in an agonized voice, "Oh, doctor, what does it mean?" The doctor did not reply at once. Ultimately he said, "She is sinking fast. Her heart was previously affected, and physical exhaustion has dealt the finishing blow." Then there was a weeping of women, then waiting, then hushed exclamations, then a strange gasping sound, then a painful stillness. "It is all over," said the doctor. Farther back in the hut, the cotters whispered, "Mrs. Yeobright is dead." Almost at the same moment the two watchers observed the form of a small, old-fashioned child entering at the open side of the shed. Susan Nonsuch, whose boy it was, went forward to the opening and silently beckoned to him to go back. "I got something to tell 'ee, mother," he cried in a shrill tone. "That woman asleep there walked along with me today, and she said I was to say that I had seed her, and she was a broken-hearted woman and cast off by her son. And then I came on home." A confused sob, as from a man, was heard within, upon which Eustacia gasped faintly, "That's Clem. I must go to him. Yet dare I do it? No, come away." When they had withdrawn from the neighbourhood of the shed, she said huskily, "I am to blame for this. There is evil in store for me." "Was she not admitted to your house after all?" Wild Eve inquired. "No, and that's where it all lies. Oh, what shall I do? I shall not intrude upon them. I shall go straight home. Damon, goodbye. I cannot speak to you any more now." They parted company, and when Eustacia had reached the next hill, she looked back. A melancholy procession was wending its way by the light of the lantern from the hut towards Bloom's End. Wild Eve was nowhere to be seen. End of Chapter 8. End of Book 4. Book 5. The Discovery. 1. Wherefore is light given to him that is in misery? One evening, about 3 weeks after the funeral of Mrs. Yeobright, when the silver face of the moon sent a bundle of beams directly upon the floor of Clim's house at Alderworth, a woman came forth from within. She reclined over the garden gate as if to refresh herself a while. The pale lunar touches which make beauties of hags lent divinity to this face, already beautiful. She had not long been there when a man came up the road, and with some hesitation said to her, "How is he to-night, ma'am, if you please?" "He is better, though still very unwell, Humphrey," replied Eustacia. "Is he light-headed, ma'am?" "No, he is quite sensible now." "Do he rave about his mother just the same, poor fellow?" continued Humphrey. "Just as much, though not quite so wildly," she said in a low voice. "'Twas very unfortunate, ma'am, that the boy Johnny should ever ha' told him his mother's dying words about her being broken-hearted and cast off by her son. 'Twas enough to upset any man alive." Eustacia made no reply beyond that of a slight catch in her breath, as of one who fain would speak, but could not. And Humphrey, declining her invitation to come in, went away. Eustacia turned, entered the house, and ascended to the front bedroom, where a shaded light was burning. In the bed lay Clim, pale, haggard, wide awake, tossing to one side and to the other, his eyes lit by a hot light, as if the fire in their pupils were burning up their substance. "Is it you, Eustacia?" he said as she sat down. "Yes, Clim, I have been down to the gate. The moon is shining beautifully, and there is not a leaf stirring." "Shining, is it? What's the moon to a man like me? Let it shine, let anything be, so that I never see another day. Eustacia, I don't know where to look. My thoughts go through me like swords. Oh, if any man wants to make himself immortal by painting a picture of wretchedness, let him come here." "Why do you say so?" "I can't help feeling that I did my best to kill her." "No, Clim." "Yes, it was so. It is useless to excuse me. My conduct to her was too hideous. I made no advances, and she could not bring herself to forgive me. Now she is dead. If I had only shown myself willing to make it up with her sooner, and we had been friends, and then she had died, it wouldn't be so hard to bear. But I never went near her house, so she never came near mine, and didn't know how welcome she would have been. That's what troubles me. She did not know I was going to her house that very night, for she was too insensible to understand me. If she had only come to see me, I longed that she would. But it was not to be. There escaped from Eustacia one of those shivering sighs which used to shake her like a pestilent blast. She had not yet told. But Yeobright was too deeply absorbed in the ramblings incidental to his remorseful state to notice her. During his illness he had been continually talking thus. Despair had been added to his original grief by the unfortunate disclosure of the boy who had received the last words of Mrs. Yeobright, words too bitterly uttered in an hour of misapprehension. Then his distress had overwhelmed him, and he longed for death, as a field labourer longs for the shade. It was the pitiful sight of a man standing in the very focus of sorrow. He continually bewailed his tardy journey to his mother's house, because it was an error which could never be rectified, and insisted that he must have been horribly perverted by some fiend not to have thought before that it was his duty to go to her, since she did not come to him. He would ask Eustacia to agree with him in his self-condemnation, and when she, seared inwardly by a secret she dared not tell, declared that she could not give an opinion, he would say, "That's because you didn't know my mother's nature. She was always ready to forgive if asked to do so. But I seemed to her to be as an obstinate child, and that made her unyielding. Yet not unyielding. She was proud and reserved, no more. Yes, I can understand why she held out against me so long. She was waiting for me. I dare say she said 100 times in her sorrow, 'What a return he makes for all the sacrifices I have made for him!' I never went to her. When I set out to visit her, it was too late. Oh, to think of that is nearly intolerable." Sometimes his condition had been one of utter remorse, unsoftened by a single tear of pure sorrow, and then he writhed as he lay, fevered far more by thought than by physical ills. "If I could only get one assurance that she did not die in a belief that I was resentful," he said one day when in this mood, "it would be better to think of than a hope of heaven. But that I cannot do." "You give yourself up too much to this wearing despair," said Eustacia. "Other men's mothers have died." "That doesn't make the loss of mine less." "Yet it is less the loss than the circumstances of the loss. I sinned against her, and on that account there is no light for me." "She sinned against you, I think." "No, she did not. I committed the guilt, and may the whole burden be upon my head." "I think you might consider twice before you say that," Eustacia replied. "Single men have no doubt a right to curse themselves as much as they please, but men with wives involve two in the doom they pray down." "I am in too sorry a state to understand what you are refining on," said the wretched man. "Day and night shout at me, 'You have helped to kill her!' But in loathing myself I own, be unjust to you, my poor wife. Forgive me for it, Eustacia, for I scarcely know what I do." Eustacia was always anxious to avoid the sight of her husband in such a state as this, which had become as dreadful to her as the trial scene was to Judas Iscariot. It brought before her eyes the spectre of a worn-out woman knocking at a door which she would not open, and she shrank from contemplating it. Yet it was better for Yeobright himself when he spoke openly of his sharp regret, for in silence he endured infinitely more, and would sometimes remain so long in a tense, brooding mood, consuming himself by the gnawing of his thought, that it was imperatively necessary to make him talk aloud, that his grief might in some degree expend itself in the effort. Eustacia had not been long indoors after her look at the moonlight, when a soft footstep came up to the house, and Thomasin was announced by the woman downstairs. "Ah, Thomasin, thank you for coming tonight," said Clym, when she entered the room. "Here am I, you see. Such a wretched spectacle am I, that I shrink from being seen by a single friend, and almost from you." "You must not shrink from me, dear Clym," said Thomasin earnestly, in that sweet voice of hers which came to a sufferer like a fresh air into a black hole. "Nothing in you can ever shock me or drive me away. I have been here before, but you don't remember it." "Yes, I do. I am not delirious, Thomasin, nor have I been so at all. Don't you believe that, if they say so. I am only in great misery at what I have done, and that, with the weakness, makes me seem mad, but it has not upset my reason. Do you think I should remember all about my mother's death if I were out of my mind? No such good luck. 2 months and a half, Thomasin, the last of her life, did my poor mother live alone, distracted and mourning because of me. Yet she was unvisited by me, though I was living only 6 miles off. 2 months and a half, 75 days, did the sun rise and set upon her in that deserted state which a dog didn't deserve. Poor people who had nothing in common with her would have cared for her and visited her had they known her sickness and loneliness, but I, who should have been all to her, stayed away like a cur. Oh, if there is any justice in God, let him kill me now. He has nearly blinded me, but that is not enough. If he would only strike me with more pain, I would believe in him forever." "Hush, hush, oh, pray, Clym, don't say it," implored Thomasin, affrighted into sobs and tears, while Eustacia, at the other side of the room, though her pale face remained calm, writhed in her chair. Clym went on without heeding his cousin. "But I am not worth receiving further proof, even of heaven's reprobation. Do you think, Thomasin, that she knew me, that she did not die in that horrid mistaken notion about my not forgiving her, which I can't tell you how she acquired? If you could only assure me of that. Do you think so, Eustacia? Do speak to me." "I think I can assure you that she knew better at last," said Thomasin. The pallid Eustacia said nothing. "Why didn't she come to my house? I would have taken her in and showed her how I loved her in spite of all, but she never came, and I didn't go to her, and she died on the heath like an animal kicked out, nobody to help her till it was too late. If you could have seen her, Thomasin, as I saw her, a poor dying woman lying in the dark upon the bare ground, moaning, nobody near, believing she was utterly deserted by all the world, it would have moved you to anguish. It would have moved a brute. And this poor woman, my mother. No wonder she said to the child, 'You have seen a broken-hearted woman.' What a state she must have been brought to say that, and who can have done it but I? It is too dreadful to think of, and I wish I could be punished more heavily than I am. How long was I what they called out of my senses? A week, I think. And then I became calm. Yes, for 4 days. And now I have left off being calm. But try to be quiet. Please do, and you will soon be strong. If you could remove that impression from your mind—" "Yes, yes," he said impatiently. "But I don't want to get strong. What's the use of my getting well? It would be better for me if I die, and it would certainly be better for Eustacia." "Is Eustacia there?" "Yes." "It would be better for you, Eustacia, if I were to die?" "Don't press such a question, dear Clem." "Well, it really is but a shadowy supposition, for unfortunately I am going to live. I feel myself getting better. Thomasin, how long are you going to stay at the inn, now that all this money has come to your husband?" "Another month or two, probably, until my illness is over. We cannot get off till then. I think it will be a month or more." "Yes, yes, of course. Ah, Cousin Tamsy, you will get over your trouble. One little month will take you through it, and bring something to console you. But I shall never get over mine, and no consolation will come." "Clem, you are unjust to yourself. Depend upon it, Aunt thought kindly of you. I know that, if she had lived, you would have been reconciled with her." "But she didn't come to see me, though I asked her before I married if she would come. Had she come, or had I gone there, she would never have died saying, 'I am a broken-hearted woman cast off by my son.' My door has always been open to her. A welcome here has always awaited her. But that she never came to see." "You had better not talk any more now, Clem," said Eustacia faintly from the other part of the room, for the scene was growing intolerable to her. "Let me talk to you instead for the little time I shall be here," Thomasin said soothingly. "Consider what a one-sided way you have of looking at the matter, Clem. When she said that to the little boy, you had not found her and taken her into your arms, and it might have been uttered in a moment of bitterness. It was rather like Aunt to say things in haste. She sometimes used to speak so to me. Though she did not come, I am convinced that she thought of coming to see you. Do you suppose a man's mother could live 2 or 3 months without one forgiving thought? She forgave me, and why should she not have forgiven you? You laboured to win her round. I did nothing. I, who was going to teach people the higher secrets of happiness, did not know how to keep out of that gross misery which the most untaught are wise enough to avoid." "How did you get here tonight, Thomasin?" said Eustacia. "Damon set me down at the end of the lane. He has driven into East Egdon on business, and he will come and pick me up by and by." Accordingly they soon after heard the noise of wheels. Wildeve had come, and was waiting outside with his horse and gig. "Send out and tell him I will be down in 2 minutes," said Thomasin. "I will run down myself," said Eustacia. She went down. Wildeve had alighted, and was standing before the horse's head, when Eustacia opened the door. He did not turn for a moment, thinking the comer Thomasin. Then he looked, started ever so little, and said one word. "Well?" "I have not yet told him," she replied in a whisper. "Then don't do so till he is well. It will be fatal. You are ill yourself." "I am wretched. Oh, Damon," she said, bursting into tears, I can't tell you how unhappy I am. I can hardly bear this. I can tell nobody of my trouble. Nobody knows of it but you." "Poor girl," said Wildeve, visibly affected at her distress, and at last led on so far as to take her hand. "It is hard, when you have done nothing to deserve it, that you should have got involved in such a web as this. You were not made for these sad scenes. I am to blame most. If I could only have saved you from it all." "But, Damon, Please, pray tell me what I must do. To sit by him hour after hour and hear him reproach himself as being the cause of her death, and to know that I am the sinner, if any human being is at all, drives me into cold despair. I don't know what to do. Should I tell him or should I not tell him? I always am asking myself that. Oh, I want to tell him, and yet I am afraid. If he finds out, he must surely kill me, for nothing else will be in proportion to his feelings now. Beware the fury of a patient man sounds day by day in my ears as I watch him. Well, wait till he is better, and trust to chance, and when you tell, you must only tell part, for his own sake. Which part should I keep back? Wild Eve paused. That I was in the house at the time, he said in a low tone. Oh, yes, it must be concealed, seeing what has been whispered. How much easier are hasty actions than speeches that will excuse them. If he were only to die, Wild Eve murmured. Do not think of it. I would not buy hope of immunity by so cowardly a desire, even if I hated him. Now I am going up to him again. Thomasin bade me to tell you she would be down in a few minutes. Good-bye. She returned, and Thomasin soon appeared. When she was seated in the gig with her husband, and the horse was turning to go off, Wild Eve lifted his eyes to the bedroom windows. Looking from one of them, he could discern a pale, tragic face watching him drive away. It was Eustatia's. End of Chapter 1. Book 5. The Discovery. 2. A lurid light breaks in upon a darkened understanding. Clem's grief became mitigated by wearing itself out. His strength returned, and a month after the visit of Thomasin, he might have been seen walking about the garden. Endurance and despair, equanimity and gloom, the tints of health and the pallor of death mingled weirdly in his face. He was now unnaturally silent upon all of the past that related to his mother, and though Eustacia knew that he was thinking of it none the less, she was only too glad to escape the topic, ever to bring it up anew. When his mind had been weaker, his heart had led him to speak out, but reason having now somewhat recovered itself, he sank into taciturnity. One evening, when he was thus standing in the garden, abstractedly spudding up a weed with his stick, a bony figure turned the corner of the house and came up to him. "Christian, isn't it?" said Clem. "I am so glad you have found me out. I shall soon want you to go to Bloom's End and assist me in putting the house in order. I suppose it is all locked up as I left it." "Oh, yes, Mr. Clem." "Have you dug up the potatoes and other roots?" "Yes, without a drop of rain, thank God. But I was coming to tell 'ee of something else, which is quite different from what we have lately had in the family. I am sent by the rich gentleman at the woman that we used to call the landlord, to tell 'ee that Mrs. Wild Eve is doing well of a girl, which was born punctually at 1 o'clock at noon, or a few minutes more or less, and 'tis said that expecting of this increase is what have kept 'em there since they came into their money." "And she's getting on well, you say?" "Oh, yes, sir. Only Mr. Wild Eve is twanky because 'tisn't a boy. That's what they say in the kitchen, but I was not supposed to notice that." "Christian, now listen to me." "Oh, yes, sure, Mr. Yeobright." "Did you see my mother the day before she died?" "Oh, no, I did not." Yeobright's face expressed disappointment. "But I seed her the morning of the same day she died." Clem's look lighted up. "That's nearer still to my meaning," he said. "Oh, yes, I know 'twas the same day, for she said, 'I be going to see him, Christian, so I shall not want any vegetables brought in for dinner.'" "See whom?" "I see you. She was going to your house, you understand." Yeobright regarded Christian with intense surprise. "Why did you never mention this?" he said. "Are you sure it was my house she was coming to?" "Oh, yes. I didn't mention it, because I'd never seed you lately, and as she didn't get there, 'twas all naught, and nothing to tell." "And I have been wondering why she should have walked in the heath on that hot day." "Well, did she say what she was coming for? It is a thing, Christian, I am very anxious to know." "Oh, yes, Mr. Clem. She didn't say it to me, though I think she did to one here and there." "Do you know one person to whom she spoke of it?" "Oh, there is one man, please sir, but I hope you won't mention my name to him, as I have seen him in strange places, particular in dreams. One night last summer he glared at me like famine and sword, and it made me feel so low that I didn't comb out my few hairs for 2 days. He was standing, as it might be, Mr. Yeobright, in the middle of the path to mist over, and your mother came up, looking as pale—" Yes, when was that?" "Last summer, in my dream." "Oh, pooh! Who's the man?" "Diggory, the Reddled man. He called upon her and sat with her the evening before she set out to see you. I hadn't gone home from work when he came up to the gate." "I must see Ven. I wish I'd known it before," said Clem anxiously. "I wonder why he has not come to tell me." "He went out of Egdon Heath the next day, so would not be likely to know you wanted him." "Christian," said Clem, "you must go and find Ven. I am otherwise engaged, or I would go myself. Find him at once, and tell him I want to speak to him." "Oh, I'm a good hand at hunting up folk by day," said Christian, looking dubiously round at the declining light. "But as to night time, never is such a bad hand as I, Mr. Yeobright." "Search the heath when you will, so that you bring him soon. Bring him tomorrow if you can." Christian then departed. The morrow came, but no Ven. In the evening Christian arrived, looking very weary. He had been searching all day, and had heard nothing of the Reddle men. "Inquire as much as you can tomorrow, without neglecting your work," said Yeobright. "Don't come again till you have found him." The next day Yeobright set out for the old house at Bloom's End, which, with the garden, was now his own. His severe illness had hindered all preparations for his removal thither, but it had become necessary that he should go and overlook its contents as administrator to his mother's little property, for which purpose he decided to pass the next night on the premises. He journeyed onward, not quickly or decisively, but in the slow walk of one who has been awakened from a stupefying sleep. It was early afternoon when he reached the valley. The expression of the place, the tone of the hour, were precisely those of many such occasions in days gone by, and these antecedent similarities fostered the illusion that she, who was there no longer, would come out to welcome him. The garden gate was locked and the shutters were closed, just as he himself had left them on the evening after the funeral. He unlocked the gate and found that a spider had already constructed a large web tying the door to the lintel, on the supposition that it was never to be opened again. When he had entered the house and flung back the shutters, he set about his task of overhauling the cupboards and closets, burning papers, and considering how best to arrange the place for Eustatia's reception, until such time as he might be in a position to carry out his long-delayed scheme, should that time ever arrive. As he surveyed the rooms, he felt strongly disinclined for the alterations which would have to be made in the time-honoured furnishing of his parents and grandparents to suit Eustatia's modern ideas. The gaunt oak-cased clock, with the picture of the Ascension on the door-panel, and the miraculous draught of fishes on the base, his grandmother's corner cupboard with the glass door, through which the spotted china was visible, the dumb waiter, the wooden tea-trays, the hanging fountain with the brass tap. Whither would these venerable articles have to be banished? He noticed that the flowers in the windows had died for want of water, and he placed them out upon the ledge, that they might be taken away. While thus engaged, he heard footsteps on the gravel without, and somebody knocked at the door. Yeobright opened it, and Ven was standing before him. "Good morning," said the Reddleman. "Is Mrs. Yeobright at home?" Yeobright looked upon the ground. "Then you have not seen Christian or any of the Egdon folks?" he said. "No, I have only just returned after a long stay away. I called here the day before I left." "And you have heard nothing?" "No, nothing." "My mother is dead." "Dead?" said Ven mechanically. "Her home now is where I shouldn't mind having mine." Ven regarded him and then said, "If I didn't see your face, I could never believe your words. Have you been ill?" "I had an illness." "Well, the change. When I parted from her a month ago, everything seemed to say that she was going to begin a new life. And what seemed came true. You say right, no doubt. Trouble has taught you a deeper vein of talk than mine. All I meant was regarding her life here. She has died too soon. Perhaps through my living too long. I have had a bitter experience on that score this last month, Diggory. But come in, I've been wanting to see you." He conducted the Reddleman into the large room where the dancing had taken place the previous Christmas, and they sat down in the settle together. "There's the cold fireplace, you see," said Clym. "When that half-burnt log and those cinders were alight, she was alive. Little has been changed here yet. I can do nothing. My life creeps like a snail." "How came she to die?" said Ven. Yeobright gave him some particulars of her illness and death, and continued, "After this no kind of pain will ever seem more than an indisposition to me. I began saying that I wanted to ask you something, but I stray from subjects like a drunken man. I am anxious to know what my mother said to you when she last saw you. You talked with her a long time, I think." "I talked with her more than half an hour." "About me?" "Yes, and it must have been on account of what we said that she was on the heath. Without question she was coming to see you." "But why should she come to see me if she felt so bitterly against me? There's the mystery. Yet I know she quite forgave thee." "But, Diggory, would a woman who had quite forgiven her son say, when she felt herself ill on the way to his house, that she was broken-hearted because of his ill usage? Never. What I know is that she didn't blame you at all. She blamed herself for what had happened, and only herself. I had it from her own lips." "You had it from her lips that I had not ill-treated her? And at the same time another had it from her lips that I had ill-treated her? My mother was no impulsive woman who changed her opinion every hour without reason. How can it be, then, that she should have told such different stories in close succession? I cannot say. It is certainly odd when she had forgiven you, and had forgiven your wife, and was going to see you on purpose to make friends. If there was one thing wanting to bewilder me, it was this incomprehensible thing. Diggory, if we who remain alive were only allowed to hold conversation with the dead just once, a bare minute, even through a screen of iron bars, as with persons in prison, what we might learn! How many who now ride smiling would hide their heads! And this mystery, I should then be at the bottom of it at once. But the grave has forever shut her in, and how shall it be found out now? No reply was returned by his companion, since none could be given, and when Ven left a few minutes later, Clym had passed from the dullness of sorrow to the fluctuation of carking incertitude. He continued in the same state all the afternoon. A bed was made up for him in the same house by a neighbour, that he might not have to return again the next day, and when he retired to rest in the deserted place, it was only to remain awake hour after hour, thinking the same thoughts. How to discover a solution to this riddle of death seemed a query of more importance than highest problems of the living. There was housed in his memory a vivid picture of the face of a little boy as he entered the hovel where Clym's mother lay. The round eyes, eager gaze, the piping voice, which enunciated the words, had operated like stilettos on his brain. A visit to the boy suggested itself as a means of gleaning new particulars, though it might be quite unproductive. To probe a child's mind after the lapse of 6 weeks, not for facts which the child had seen and understood, but to get at those which were in their nature beyond him, did not promise much. Yet, when every obvious channel is blocked, we grope towards the small and obscure. There was nothing else left to do. After that he would allow the enigma to drop into the abyss of undiscoverable things. It was about daybreak when he had reached this decision, and he at once arose. He locked up the house and went out into the green patch, which merged in heather further on. In front of the white garden palings the path branched into 3 like a broad arrow. The road to the right led to the Quiet Woman and its neighbourhood. The middle track led to Mistover Nap, and the left-hand track led over the hill to another part of Mistover, where the child lived. On inclining into the latter path, Yeobright felt a creeping chilliness, familiar enough to most people, and probably caused by the unsunned morning air. In after days he thought of it as a thing of singular significance. When Yeobright reached the cottage of Susan Nonsuch, the mother of the boy he sought, he found that the inmates were not yet astir. But in upland hamlets the transition from abed to abroad is surprisingly swift and easy. There no dense partition of yawns and toilets divides humanity by night from humanity by day. Yeobright tapped at the upper window-sill, which he could reach with his walking-stick, and in 3 or 4 minutes the woman came down. It was not till this moment that Clym recollected her to be the person who had behaved so barbarously to Eustacia. It partly explained the insuavity with which the woman greeted him. Moreover, the boy had been ailing again, and Susan now, as ever since the night when he had been pressed into Eustacia's service at the bonfire, attributed his indispositions to Eustacia's influence as a witch. 'Twas one of those sentiments which lurk like moles underneath the visible surface of manners, and may have been kept alive by Eustacia's entreaty to the captain at the time he had intended to prosecute Susan for the pricking in church, to let the matter drop, which he had accordingly done. Yeobright overcame his repugnance, for Susan had at least borne his mother no ill will. He asked kindly for the boy, but her manner did not improve. "I wish to see him," continued Yeobright with some hesitation, "to ask him if he remembers anything more of his walk with my mother than what he has previously told." She regarded him in a peculiar and criticizing manner. To anybody but a half-blind man it would have said, "You want another of the knocks which have already laid you so low." She called the boy downstairs, asked Clem to sit down on a stool, and continued, "Now, Johnny, tell Mr. Yeobright anything you can call to mind." "You have not forgotten how you walked with the poor lady on that hot day?" said Clem. "No," said the boy. "And what she said to you?" The boy repeated the exact words he had used on entering the hut. Yeobright rested his elbow on the table and shaded his face with his hand, and the mother looked as if she wondered how a man could want more of what had stung him so deeply. "She was going to Alderworth when you first met her?" "No, she was coming away." "That can't be." "Yes, she walked along with me. I was coming away too." "Then where did you first see her?" "At your house." "Now attend and speak the truth," said Clem sternly. "Yes, sir. At your house was where I seed her first." Clem started up, and Susan smiled in an expectant way which did not embellish her face. It seemed to mean, "Something sinister is coming." "What did she do at my house?" "She went and sat under the trees at the Devil's Bellows." "Good God, this is all news to me." "You never told me this before," said Susan. "No, mother, because I didn't like to tell 'ee I had been so far. I was picking black hearts, and went farther than I meant." "What did she do then?" said Yeobright. "Looked at a man who came up and went into your house." "That was myself, a furze cutter with brambles in his hand." "No, 'twas not you. 'Twas a gentleman. You had gone in afore." "Who was he?" "Oh, I don't know." "Now tell me what happened next." "The poor lady went and knocked at your door, and the lady with black hair looked out of the side window at her." The boy's mother turned to Clem and said, "This is something you didn't expect?" Yeobright took no more notice of her than if she had been of stone. "Go on, go on," he said hoarsely to the boy. "And when she saw the young lady look out of the window, the old lady knocked again. And when nobody came, she took up the furze hook and looked at it, and put it down again. And then she looked at the faggot bonds. And then she went away, and walked across to me, and blowed her breath very hard, like this. We walked on together, she and I talked to her, and she talked to me a bit, but not much, because she couldn't blow her breath." "Oh," murmured Clem in a low tone, and bowed his head. "Let's have more," he said. "She couldn't talk much, and she couldn't walk, and her face was so queer." "How was her face?" "Like yours is now." The woman looked at Yeobright and beheld him colourless in a cold sweat. "Isn't there meaning in it?" she said stealthily. "What do you think of her now?" "Silence!" said Clem fiercely, and turning to the boy, "And then you left her to die?" "No," said the woman quickly and angrily. "He did not leave her to die. She sent him away. Whoever says he forsook her says what's not true." "Trouble no more about that," answered Clym with a quivering mouth. "What he did is a trifle in comparison with what he saw." "Door kept shut, did you say? Kept shut? She looking out of the window? Good heart of God, what does it mean?" The child shrank away from the gaze of his questioner. "He said so," answered the mother, "and Johnny's a God-fearing boy and tells no lies." "Cast off by my son? No, by my best life, dear mother, it is not so. But by your sons, oh, may all murderesses get the torment they deserve." With these words Yeobright went forth from the little dwelling. The pupils of his eyes, fixed steadfastly on blankness, were vaguely lit with an icy shine. His mouth had passed into the phase more or less imaginatively rendered in studies of Oedipus. The strangest deeds were possible to his mood, but they were not possible to his situation. Instead of there being before him the pale face of Eustacia, and a masculine shape unknown, there was only the imperturbable countenance of the heath, which, having defied the cataclysmal onsets of centuries, reduced to insignificance by its seamed and antique features the wildest turmoil of a single man. End of chapter 2. Book 5. The Discovery. 3. Eustacia dresses herself on a black morning. A consciousness of a vast impassivity in all which lay around him took possession even of Yeobright in his wild walk towards Alderworth. He had once before felt in his own person this overpowering of the fervid by the inanimate, but then it had tended to enervate a passion far sweeter than that which at present pervaded him. It was once when he stood parting from Eustacia in the moist, still levels beyond the hills. But dismissing all this, he went onward home and came to the front of his house. The blinds of Eustacia's bedroom were still closely drawn, for she was no early riser. All the life visible was in the shape of a solitary thrush, cracking a small snail upon the doorstone for his breakfast, and his tapping seemed a loud noise in the general silence which prevailed. But on going to the door, Clym found it unfastened, the young girl who attended upon Eustacia being astir in the back part of the house. Yeobright entered, and went straight to his wife's room. The noise of his arrival must have aroused her, for when he opened the door she was standing before the looking-glass in her night-dress, the ends of her hair gathered into one hand, with which she was coiling the whole mass round her head, previous to beginning toilette operations. She was not a woman given to speaking first at a meeting, and she allowed Clym to walk across in silence, without turning her head. He came behind her, and she saw his face in the glass. It was ashy, haggard, and terrible. Instead of starting towards him in sorrowful surprise, as even Eustacia, undemonstrative wife as she was, would have done in days before she burdened herself with a secret, she remained motionless, looking at him in the glass. And while she looked, the carmine flush with which warmth and sound sleep had suffused her cheeks and neck dissolved from view, and the death-like pallor in his face flew across into hers. He was close enough to see this, and the sight instigated his tongue. "You know what is the matter," he said, huskily. "I see it in your face." Her hand relinquished the rope of hair and dropped to her side, and the pile of tresses, no longer supported, fell from the crown of her head about her shoulders and over the white nightgown. She made no reply. "Speak to me," said Yeobright peremptorily. The blanching process did not cease in her, and her lips now became as white as her face. She turned to him and said, "Yes, Clem, I'll speak to you. Why do you return so early? Can I do anything for you?" "Yes, you can listen to me. It seems that my wife is not very well." "Why?" "Your face, my dear, your face. Or perhaps it is the pale morning light which takes your colour away. Now I'm going to reveal a secret to you." "Oh, that is ghastly." "What?" "Your laugh." "There's reason for ghastliness. Eustacia, you have held my happiness in the hollow of your hand, and like a devil you have dashed it down." She started back from the dressing-table, retreated a few steps from him, and looked him in the face. You think to frighten me," she said, with a slight laugh. "Is it worth while? I am undefended, and alone." "How extraordinary!" "What do you mean?" "As there is ample time, I will tell you, though you know well enough. I mean that it is extraordinary that you should be alone in my absence. Tell me now, where is he who was with you on the afternoon of the 31st of August? Under the bed? Up the chimney?" A shudder overcame her and shook the light fabric of her nightdress throughout. I do not remember dates so exactly," she said. I cannot recollect that anybody was with me besides yourself." "The day I mean," said Yeobright, his voice growing louder and harsher, "was the day you shut the door against my mother and killed her. Oh, it's too much, too bad." He leant over the footpiece of the bedstead for a few moments with his back towards her, then rising again, "Tell me, tell me, tell me, do you hear?" he cried, rushing up to her and seizing her by the loose folds of her sleeve. The superstratum of timidity which often overlies those who are daring and defiant at heart had been passed through, and the mettlesome substance of the woman was reached. The red blood inundated her face, previously so pale. "What are you going to do?" she said in a low voice, regarding him with a proud smile. "You will not alarm me by holding on so, but it would be a pity to tear my sleeve." Instead of letting go, he drew her closer to him. "Tell me the particulars of my mother's death," he said in a hard, panting whisper, "or I'll... "Clem," she answered slowly, "do you think you dare do anything to me that I dare not bear? But before you strike me, listen. You will get nothing from me by a blow, even though it should kill me, as it probably will. But perhaps you do not wish me to speak. Killing may be all you mean." "Kill you? Do you expect it?" "I do." "Why?" "No less degree of rage against me will match your previous grief for her." "Pshaw! I shall not kill you," he said, contemptuously, as if under a sudden change of purpose. I did think of it, but I shall not. That would be making a martyr of you and sending you to where she is, and I would keep you away from her till the universe come to an end, if I could." "I almost wish you would kill me," said she with gloomy bitterness. "It is with no strong desire, I assure you, that I play the part I have lately played on earth. You are no blessing, my husband." "You shut the door. You looked out of the window upon her. You had a man in the house with you. You sent her away to die. The inhumanity, the treachery. I will not touch you. Stand away from me and confess every word." "Never. I'll hold my tongue like the very death that I don't mind meeting, even though I can clear myself of half you believe by speaking. Yes, I will. Who of any dignity would take the trouble to clear cobwebs from a wild man's mind after such language as this? No, let him go on, and think his narrow thoughts, and run his head into the mire. I have other cares. Oh, 'tis too much, but I must spare you." "Poor Charity." "By my wretched soul, you sting me, Eustacia. I can keep it up, and hotly too. Now then, madam, tell me his name." "Never. I am resolved." "How often does he write to you? Where does he put his letters? When does he meet you? Ah, his letters. Do you tell me his name?" "I do not." "Then I'll find it myself." His eye had fallen upon a small desk that stood near, on which she was accustomed to write her letters. He went to it. It was locked. "Unlock this." "You have no right to say it. That's mine." Without another word, he seized the desk and dashed it to the floor. The hinge burst open, and a number of letters tumbled out. "Stay!" said Eustacia, stepping before him with more excitement than she had hitherto shown. "Come, come, stand away! I must see them!" She looked at the letters as they lay, checked her feeling, and moved indifferently aside, when he gathered them up and examined them. By no stretch of meaning could any but a harmless construction be placed upon a single one of the letters themselves. The solitary exception was an empty envelope directed to her, and the handwriting was Wildeve's. Yeobright held it up. Eustacia was doggedly silent. "Can you read, madam? Look at this envelope. Doubtless we shall find more soon, and what was inside them. I shall no doubt be gratified by learning in good time what a well-finished and full-blown adept in a certain trade my lady is." "Do you say it to me? Do you?" she gasped. He searched further, but found nothing more. "What was in this letter?" he said. "Ask the writer. Am I your hound, that you should talk to me in this way?" "Do you brave me? Do you stand me out, mistress? Answer! Don't look at me with those eyes, as if you would bewitch me again. Sooner than that, I die. You refuse to answer?" "I wouldn't tell you after this, if I were as innocent as the sweetest babe in heaven." "Which you are not." "Certainly I am not, absolutely," she replied. "I have not done what you suppose. But if to have done no harm at all is the only innocence recognized, I am beyond forgiveness. But I require no help from your conscience." "You can resist and resist again. Instead of hating you, I could, I think, mourn for and pity you if you were contrite and would confess all. Forgive you I never can. I don't speak of your lover. I will give you the benefit of the doubt in that matter, for it only affects me personally. But the other, had you half killed me, had it been that you wilfully took the sight away from these feeble eyes of mine, I could have forgiven you. But that's too much for nature. Say no more, I will do without your pity. But I would have saved you from uttering what you will regret. I am going away now. I shall leave you. You need not go, as I am going myself. You will keep just as far away from me by staying here. Call her to mind. Think of her. What goodness there was in her. It showed in every line of her face. Most women, even when slightly annoyed, show a flicker of evil in some curl of the mouth or some corner of the cheek, but as for her, never in her angrier moments was there anything malicious in her look. She was angered quickly, but she forgave just as readily, and underneath her pride there was the meekness of a child. What came of it? What cared you? You hated her just as she was learning to love you. Oh, couldn't you see what was best for you, but must bring a curse upon me, and agony and death upon her, by doing that cruel deed? What was the fellow's name who was keeping you company and causing you to add cruelty to her, to your wrong to me? Was it Wild Eve? Was it poor Thomasin's husband? Heaven, what wickedness! Lost your voice, have you? It is natural after detection of that most noble trick. Eustacia, didn't any tender thought of your own mother lead you to think of being gentle to mine at such a time of weariness? Did not one grain of pity enter your heart as she turned away? Think what a vast opportunity was then lost of beginning a forgiving and honest course. Why did you not kick him out and let her in, and say, I'll be an honest wife and a noble woman from this hour? Had I told you to go and quench eternally our last flickering chance of happiness here, you could have done no worse. Well, she's asleep now, and have you 100 gallants, neither they nor you can insult her any more. You exaggerate fearfully, she said in a faint, weary voice. But I cannot enter into my defence. It is not worth doing. You are nothing to me in future, and the past side of the story may as well remain untold. I have lost all through you, but I have not complained. Your blunders and misfortunes may have been a sorrow to you, but they've been a wrong to me. All persons of refinement have been scared away from me since I sank into the mire of marriage. Is this your cherishing, to put me into a hut like this, and keep me like the wife of a hind? You deceived me, not by words, but by appearances, which are less seen through than words. But the place will serve as well as any other, as somewhere to pass from into my grave. Her words were smothered in her throat, and her head drooped down. I don't know what you mean by that. Am I the cause of your sin? Eustacia made a trembling motion towards him. What? You can begin to shed tears and offer me your hand? Good God, can you? No, not I. I'll not commit the fault of taking that. The hand she had offered dropped nervelessly, but the tears continued flowing. Well, yes, I'll take it, if only for the sake of my own foolish kisses that were wasted there before I knew what I cherished. How bewitched I was! How could there be any good in a woman that everybody spoke ill of? Oh, oh, oh! She cried, breaking down at last. And shaking with sobs which choked her, she sank upon her knees. Oh, will you have done? Oh, you are too relentless. There's a limit to the cruelty of savages. I have held out long, but you crush me down. I beg for mercy. I cannot bear this any longer. It is inhuman to go further with this. If I had killed your mother with my own hand, I should not deserve such a scourging to the bone as this. Oh, God have mercy upon a miserable woman. You have beaten me in this game. I beg you to stay your hand in pity. I confess that I wilfully did not undo the door the first time she knocked, but I should have unfastened it the second, if I had not thought you had gone to do it yourself. When I found you had not, I opened it, but she was gone. That's the extent of my crime towards her. Best natures commit bad faults sometimes, don't they? I think they do. Now I will leave you, forever and ever. Tell all, and I will pity you. Was the man in the house with you, Wild Eve? I cannot tell, she said desperately through her sobbing. Don't insist further, I cannot tell. I am going from this house. We cannot both stay here. You need not go. I will go. You can stay here. No, I will dress, and then I will go. Where? Where I came from, or elsewhere. She hastily dressed herself, Yeobright moodily walking up and down the room the whole of the time. At last all her things were on. Her little hands quivered so violently as she held them to her chin to fasten her bonnet, and she could not tie the strings, and after a few moments she relinquished the attempt. Seeing this, he moved forward and said, "Let me tie them." She assented in silence and lifted her chin. For once, at least in her life, she was totally oblivious of the charm of her attitude. But he was not, and he turned his eyes aside that he might not be tempted to softness. The strings were tied. She turned from him. "Do you still prefer going away yourself to my leaving you?" he inquired again. "I do." "Very well, let it be. And when you will confess to the man, I may pity you." She flung her shawl about her and went downstairs, leaving him standing in the room. Eustacia had not long been gone when there came a knock at the door of the bedroom, and Yeobright said, "Well?" It was the servant, and she replied, "Somebody from Mrs. Wildeve's have called to tell you that the missus and the baby are getting on wonderful well, and the baby's name is to be Eustacia Clementine." And the girl retired. "What a mockery!" said Clem. "This unhappy marriage of mine, to be perpetuated in that child's name." End of Chapter 3. Book 5. The Discovery. 4. The Ministrations of a Half-Forgotten One. Eustacia's journey was at first as vague in direction as that of thistledown on the wind. She did not know what to do. She wished it had been night instead of morning, that she might at least have borne her misery without the possibility of being seen. Tracing mile after mile along between the dying ferns and the wet white spiders' webs, she at length turned her step towards her grandfather's house. She found the front door closed and locked. Mechanically she went round to the end where the stable was, and on looking in at the stable door, she saw Charlie standing within. "Captain Vi is not at home?" she said. "No, ma'am," said the lad, in a flutter of feeling. "He's gone to Weatherbury, and won't be home till night, and the servant's gone home for a holiday, so the house is locked up." Eustacia's face was not visible to Charlie as she stood at the doorway, her back being to the sky, and the stable but indifferently lighted, but the wildness of her manner arrested his attention. She turned and walked away across the enclosure to the gate, and was hidden by the bank. When she had disappeared, Charlie, with misgiving in his eyes, slowly came from the stable door, and going to another point in the bank, he looked over. Eustacia was leaning against it on the outside, her face covered with her hands, and her head pressing the dewy heather which bearded the bank's outer side. She appeared to be utterly indifferent to the circumstance that her bonnet, hair, and garments were becoming wet and disarranged by the moisture of her cold, harsh pillow. Clearly something was wrong. Charlie had always regarded Eustacia, as Eustacia had regarded Clym when she first beheld him, as a romantic and sweet vision, scarcely incarnate. He had been so shut off from her by the dignity of her look and the pride of her speech, except at that one blissful interval when he was allowed to hold her hand, that he had hardly deemed her a woman, wingless and earthly, subject to household conditions and domestic jars. The inner details of her life he had only conjectured. She had been a lovely wonder, predestined to an orbit in which the whole of his own was but a point. And this sight of her leaning like a helpless, despairing creature against a wild, wet bank filled him with an amazed horror. He could no longer remain where he was. Leaping over, he came up, touched her with his finger, and said tenderly, "You are poorly, ma'am. What can I do?" Eustacia started up and said, "Ah, Charlie, you have followed me. Oh, you did not think when I left home in the summer that I should come back like this." "I did not, dear ma'am. Can I help you now?" "I'm afraid not. I wish I could get into the house. I feel giddy, that's all." "Lean on my arm, ma'am, till we get to the porch, and I will try to open the door." He supported her to the porch, and there depositing her on a seat, hastened to the back, climbed to a window by the help of a ladder, and descending inside, opened the door. Next he assisted her into the room, where there was an old-fashioned horse-hair settee as large as a donkey-wagon. She lay down here, and Charlie covered her with a cloak he found in the hall. "Shall I get you something to eat and drink?" he said. "Oh, if you please, Charlie. But I suppose there's no fire." "Oh, I can light it, ma'am." He vanished, and she heard a splitting of wood and a blowing of bellows, and presently he returned, saying, "I lighted a fire in the kitchen, and now I'll light one here." He lit the fire, Eustacia dreamily observing him from her couch. When it was blazing up, he said, "Shall I wheel you round in front of it, ma'am, as the morning is chilly?" "Yes, if you like." "Shall I go and bring the victuals now?" "Yes, do," she murmured languidly. When he had gone, and the dull sounds occasionally reached her ears of his movements in the kitchen, she forgot where she was, and had for a moment to consider by an effort what the sounds meant. After an interval which seemed short to her whose thoughts were elsewhere, he came in with a tray on which steamed tea and toast, though it was nearly lunch-time. "Place it on the table," she said. "I shall be ready soon." He did so, and retired to the door. When, however, he perceived that she did not move, he came back a few steps. "Let me hold it to you, if you don't wish to get up," said Charlie. He brought the tray to the front of the couch, where he knelt down, adding, "I'll hold it for you." Eustacia sat up and poured out a cup of tea. "You are very kind to me, Charlie," she murmured as she sipped. "Well, I ought to be," said he, diffidently, taking great trouble not to rest his eyes upon her, though this was their only natural position, Eustacia being immediately before him. You've been kind to me." "How have I?" said Eustacia. "You let me hold your hand when you were a maiden at home." "Ah, so I did. Why did I do that? My mind is lost. It had to do with the mumming, had it not?" "Yes, you wanted to go in my place." "I remember. I do indeed remember. Too well." She again became utterly downcast, and Charlie, seeing that she was not going to eat or drink any more, took away the tray. Afterwards he occasionally came in to see if the fire was burning, to ask her if she wanted anything, to tell her that the wind had shifted from south to west, to ask her if she would like him to gather her some blackberries. To all which inquiries she replied in the negative, or with indifference. She remained on the settee some time longer, when she aroused herself and went upstairs. The room in which she had formerly slept still remained much as she had left it, and the recollection that this forced upon her of her own greatly changed and infinitely worsened situation again set on her face the undetermined and formless misery which it had worn on her first arrival. She peeped into her grandfather's room, through which the fresh autumn air was blowing from the open window. Her eye was arrested by what was a familiar sight enough, though it broke upon her now with a new significance. It was a brace of pistols hanging near the head of her grandfather's bed, which he always kept there loaded as a precaution against possible burglars, the house being very lonely. Eustacia regarded them long, as if they were the page of a book in which she read a new and a strange matter. Quickly, like one afraid of herself, she returned downstairs and stood in deep thought. "If I could only do it," she said, "it would be doing much good to myself and all connected with me, and no harm to a single one." The idea seemed to gather force within her, and she remained in a fixed attitude nearly 10 minutes, when a certain finality was expressed in her gaze, and no longer the blankness of indecision. She turned and went up the second time, softly and stealthily now, and entered her grandfather's room, her eyes at once seeking the head of the bed. The pistols were gone. The instant quashing of her purpose by their absence affected her brain as a sudden vacuum affects the body. She nearly fainted. Who had done this? There was only one person on the premises besides herself. Eustacia involuntarily turned to the open window which overlooked the garden as far as the bank that bounded it. On the summit of the latter stood Charlie, sufficiently elevated by its height to see into the room. His gaze was directed eagerly and solicitously upon her. She went downstairs to the door and beckoned to him. "You've taken them away?" "Yes, ma'am." "Why did you do it?" "I saw you looking at them too long." "What has that to do with it?" "You've been broken-hearted all the morning, as if you did not want to live." "Well?" "And I could not bear to leave them in your way. There was meaning in your look at them." "Where are they now?" "Locked up." "Where?" "In the stable." "Give them to me." "No, ma'am." "You refuse?" "I do. I care too much for you to give them up." She turned aside, her face for the first time softening from the stony immobility of the earlier day, and the corners of her mouth resuming something of that delicacy of cut which was always lost in her moments of despair. At last she confronted him again. Why should I not die if I wish?" she said tremulously. "I have made a bad bargain with life. and I am weary of it, weary. And now you've hindered my escape. Oh, why did you, Charlie? What makes death painful except the thought of others' grief? And that is absent in my case, for not a sigh would follow me. Oh, it's trouble that's done this. I wish in my very soul that he who brought it about might die and rot, even if 'tis transportation to say it. Charlie, no more of that. What do you mean to do about this you have seen? Keep it close as night, if you promise not to think of it again. You need not fear. The moment has passed, I promise. She then went away, entered the house, and lay down. Later in the afternoon her grandfather returned. He was about to question her categorically, but on looking at her, he withheld his words. Yes, it is too bad to talk of, she slowly returned in answer to his glance. Can my old room be got ready for me tonight, grandfather? I shall want to occupy it again. He did not ask what it all meant, or why she had left her husband, but ordered the room to be prepared. End of Chapter 4. Book 5. The Discovery. 5. An old move, inadvertently repeated. Charlie's attentions to his former mistress were unbounded. The only solace to his own trouble lay in his attempts to relieve hers. Hour after hour he considered her wants. He thought of her presence there with a sort of gratitude, and while uttering imprecations on the cause of her unhappiness, in some measure blessed the result. Perhaps she would always remain there, he thought, and then he would be as happy as he had been before. His dread was lest she should think fit to return to Alderworth, and in that dread his eyes, with all the inquisitiveness of affection, frequently sought her face when she was not observing him, as he would have watched the head of a stock-dove to learn of its contemplated flight. Having once really succoured her and possibly preserved her from the rashest of acts, he mentally assumed, in addition, a guardian's responsibility for her welfare. For this reason he busily endeavoured to provide her with pleasant distractions, bringing home curious objects which he found in the heath, such as white, trumpet-shaped mosses, red-headed lichens, stone arrowheads used by the old tribes on Egdon, and faceted crystals from the hollows of flints. These he deposited on the premises in such positions that she should see them as if by accident. A week passed, Eustacia never going out of the house. Then she walked into the enclosed plot and looked through her grandfather's spy-glass, as she had been in the habit of doing before her marriage. One day she saw, at a place where the high road crossed the distant valley, a heavily laden wagon passing along. It was piled with household furniture. She looked again, and recognized it to be her own. In the evening her grandfather came indoors with a rumour that Yeobright had removed that day from Alderworth to the old house at Bloom's End. On another occasion, when reconnoitring thus, she beheld 2 female figures walking in the vale. The day was fine and clear, and the persons not being more than half a mile off, she could see their every detail with the telescope. The woman walking in front carried a white bundle in her arms, from one end of which hung a long appendage of drapery, and when the walkers turned, so that the sun fell more directly upon them, Eustacia could see that the object was a baby. She called Charlie, and asked him if he knew who they were, though she well guessed. Mrs. Wildeve and the nurse girl," said Charlie. "The nurse is carrying the baby?" said Eustacia. "No, 'tis Mrs. Wildeve carrying that," he answered, "and the nurse walks behind, carrying nothing." The lad was in good spirits that day, for the 5th of November had again come round, and he was planning yet another scheme to divert her from her too absorbing thoughts. For 2 successive years his mistress had seemed to take pleasure in lighting a bonfire on the bank overlooking the valley, but this year she had apparently quite forgotten the day and the customary deed. He was careful not to remind her, and went on with his secret preparations for a cheerful surprise, the more zealously that he had been absent last time, and unable to assist. At every vacant minute he hastened to gather furze stumps, thorn-tree roots, and the other solid materials from the adjacent slopes, hiding them from cursory view. The evening came, and Eustacia was still seemingly unconscious of the anniversary. She had gone indoors after her survey through the glass, and had not been visible since. As soon as it was quite dark, Charlie began to build a bonfire, choosing precisely that spot on the bank which Eustacia had chosen at previous times. When all the surrounding bonfires had burst into existence, Charlie kindled his, and arranged its fuel so that it should not require tending for some time. He then went back to the house and lingered round the door and windows till she should by some means or other learn of his achievement and come out to witness it. But the shutters were closed, the door remained shut, and no heed whatever seemed to be taken of his performance. Not liking to call her, he went back and replenished the fire, continuing to do this for more than half an hour. It was not till his stock of fuel had greatly diminished that he went to the back door and sent in, to beg that Mrs. Yeobright would open the window shutters and see the sight outside. Eustacia, who had been sitting listlessly in the parlour, started up at the intelligence and flung open the shutters. Facing her on the bank blazed the fire, which at once sent a ruddy glare into the room where she was, and overpowered the candles. "Well done, Charlie," said Captain Vi from the chimney-corner. "But I hope it's not my wood he's burning. 'Twas this time last year that I met with that man Venn, bringing home Thomas and Yeobright. To be sure it was. Well, who would have thought that girl's troubles would have ended so well? What a snipe you were in that matter, Eustacia. Has your husband written to you yet?" "No," said Eustacia, looking vaguely through the window at the fire, which just then so much engaged her mind that she did not resent her grandfather's blunt opinion. She could see Charlie's form on the bank, shovelling and stirring the fire, and there flashed upon her imagination some other form which that fire might call up. She left the room, put on her garden bonnet and cloak, and went out. Reaching the bank, she looked over, with a wild curiosity and misgiving, when Charlie said to her, with a pleased sense of himself, "I made it a purpose for you, ma'am." "Thank you," she said hastily, "but I wish you to put it out now." "Oh, it'll soon burn down," said Charlie, rather disappointed. "Is it not a pity to knock it out?" "I don't know," she musingly answered. They stood in silence, broken only by the crackling of the flames, till Charlie, perceiving that she did not want to talk to him, moved reluctantly away. Eustacia remained within the bank, looking at the fire, intending to go indoors, yet lingering still. Had she not, by her situation, been inclined to hold in indifference all things honoured of the gods and of men, she would probably have come away. But her state was so hopeless that she could play with it. To have lost is less disturbing than to wonder if we may possibly have won. And Eustacia could now, like other people at such a stage, take a standing point outside herself, observe herself as a disinterested spectator, and think what a sport for heaven this woman Eustacia was. While she stood, she heard a sound. It was the splash of a stone in the pond. Had Eustacia received the stone full in the bosom, her heart could not have given a more decided thump. She had thought of the possibility of such a signal, in answer to that which had been unwittingly given by Charlie, but she had not expected it yet. How prompt Wild Eve was! Yet how could he think her capable of deliberately wishing to renew their assignations now? An impulse to leave the spot, a desire to stay, struggled within her, and the desire held its own. More than that it did not do, for she refrained even from ascending the bank and looking over. She remained motionless, not disturbing a muscle of her face or raising her eyes. For were she to turn up her face, the fire on the bank would shine upon it, and Wild Eve might be looking down. There was a second splash into the pond. Why did he stay so long without advancing and looking over? Curiosity had its way. She ascended one or two of the earth steps in the bank and glanced out. Wild Eve was before her. He had come forward after throwing the last pebble, and the fire now shone into each of their faces from the bank stretching breast-high between them. "I did not light it," cried Eustacia quickly. "It was lit without my knowledge. Don't come over to me." "Why have you been living here all these days without telling me? You have left your home. I fear I am something to blame in this." "I did not let in his mother. That's how it is." "You do not deserve what you have got, Eustacia. You are in great misery. I see it in your eyes, your mouth, and all over you. My poor, poor girl." He stepped over the bank. "You are beyond everything unhappy." No, not exactly. It has been pushed too far. It's killing you. I do think it." Her usually quiet breathing had grown quicker with his words. I she began, and then burst into quivering sobs, shaken to the very heart by the unexpected voice of pity, a sentiment whose existence in relation to herself she had almost forgotten. This outbreak of weeping took Eustacia herself so much by surprise that she could not leave off, and she turned aside from him in some shame, though turning hid nothing from him. She sobbed on desperately. Then the outpour lessened, and she became quieter. Wild Eve had resisted the impulse to clasp her, and stood without speaking. "Are you not ashamed of me, who used never to be a crying animal?" she asked in a weak whisper, as she wiped her eyes. "Why didn't you go away? I wish you had not seen quite all that. It reveals too much by half." "You might have wished it, because it makes me as sad as you," he said with emotion and deference. "As for revealing, the word is impossible between us two." "I did not send for you. Don't forget it, Damon. I am in pain, but I did not send for you. As a wife, at least, I've been straight." "Never mind. I came. Oh, Eustacia, forgive me for the harm that I've done you these past 2 years. I see more and more that I have been your ruin." "Not you. This place I live in. Ah, your generosity may naturally make you say that, but I am the culprit. I should either have done more or nothing at all. In what way? I ought never to have hunted you out. Or, having done it, I ought to have persisted in retaining you. But of course I've no right to talk of that now. I will only ask this. Can I do anything for you? Is there anything on the face of the earth that a man can do to make you happier than you are at present? If there is, I will do it. You may command me, Eustacia, to the limit of my influence, and don't forget that I am richer now. Surely something can be done to save you from this. Such a rare plant in such a wild place, it grieves me to see. Do you want anything bought? Do you want to go anywhere? Do you want to escape the place altogether? Only say it, and I'll do anything to put an end to those tears which, but for me, would never have been at all. We are each married to another person, she said faintly, and assistance from you would have an evil sound after... Well, there's no preventing slanderers from having their fill at any time. But you need not be afraid. Whatever I may feel, I promise you on my word of honour never to speak to you about or act upon until you say, I may. I know my duty to Thomasin quite as well as I know my duty to you as a woman unfairly treated. What shall I assist you in? In getting away from here. Where do you wish to go? I have a place in my mind. If you could help me as far as Budmouth, I can do all the rest. Steamers sail from there across the Channel, and so I can get to Paris, where I want to be. Yes, she pleaded earnestly, help me to get to Budmouth Harbour, without my grandfather's or my husband's knowledge, and I can do all the rest. Will it be safe to leave you there alone? Oh, yes, I know Budmouth well. Shall I go with you? I am rich now. She was silent. Say yes, sweet. She was silent still. Well, let me know when you wish to go. We shall be at our present house till December. After that we remove to Casterbridge. Command me in anything till that time. I will think of this, she said hurriedly. Whether I can honestly make use of you as a friend, or must close with you as a lover, that is what I must ask myself. If I wish to go and decide to accept your company, I will signal to you some evening at 8 o'clock punctually, and this will mean that you are to be ready with a horse and trap at 12 o'clock the same night to drive me to Budmouth Harbour in time for the morning boat. I will look out every night at 8, and no signal shall escape me. Now, please, go away. If I decide on this escape, I can only meet you once more, unless I cannot go without you. Go, I cannot bear it longer. Go. Wild Eve slowly went up the steps and descended into the darkness on the other side. And as he walked, he glanced back, till the bank blotted out her form from his further view. End of chapter 5.